and thank you for joining us on Really Dicey. I'm Matt. My co-host Manny couldn't be here today. He's had a transporter accident and been flung 30 years into the future into an alternate reality, the mirror universe where a Manny without a goatee is trying to lead a rebellion. But if anybody knows how to get him back without violating the temporal prime directive, it's my guest here tonight. I've got Jim Johnson from Modiphius Games, and we're going to talk some more about their new game, Captain's Log. So, Jim, we've already had one short video where we talked about Captain's Log, and we were pretty excited about it. Mm-hmm. But today we're going to do a deeper dive, and we're going to go through the book. So why don't we just jump right in? We've got chapter 1. And it starts off with Star Trek Defined. Now, we've done several books in the Modiphius Star Trek line. And so I've seen this chapter or something like it quite a few times. But I always read it and I always enjoy it because to me, this is really the important bit about Star Trek. You know, the things that make Star Trek different. And I love that you start your games, you know, with this chapter, which talks about Star Trek Defined. And I gotta say that it's really heartening to read this stuff. To see that you guys understand Trek so much. I gotta say that it reminds me of West End games and Star Wars. You guys grok Star Trek in the same way that I think that they got Star Wars. So.
Well, thank you. That's high praise indeed. I was a huge fan of West End Games' game, Star Wars game back in the day when it came out, because it. I don't know. I mean, probably nowadays it still gets good credit for all the things they did for Star Wars, added so much to the expanded universe and added so much depth to species and, things. But I mean, I know for the longest time, even before the Timothy Zahn novels came out, it was, we saw Return of the Jedi in '83, and then there was like a drought, right? There's just nothing new for Star Wars coming out, except maybe the Endor movies, right? And then the West End Games role-playing game came out, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is just a whole amazing thing, right? And they supported it so well, but you could tell just by reading through the books that they love Star Wars, like Bill Smith and everybody else who was involved in the game, right? And so high praise indeed that you're saying that you think we're hitting the same notes for Star Trek. So thank you for that. That's a high compliment indeed.
Yeah. So why? I think it seems pretty self-evident, but just in case, why is this why do you lead off your books with this chapter?
Yeah, so this content is similar to content that we put into the Player's Guide and the Game Master Guide, and both of those products were aimed at a similar audience as Captain's Log, although there's a little bit of a difference because I think we really intended the Player's Guide and the Game Master Guide to be for players who were already familiar with Star Trek Adventures and Star Trek to some extent, but we wanted to have an opportunity where if a Star Trek Adventures player was trying to bring new people into their game, right, or trying to recruit people, maybe people who didn't know Star Trek or maybe who didn't know Star Trek Adventures, you could hand them your copy of the Player's Guide and say, well, read the first 2 chapters and then go watch a couple episodes, and then if you get it and you like it, then we can go play and have a good time. And so for this book, in the first 2 chapters, especially the first chapter, what is Star Trek, is like because this is a standalone game and a standalone product, we went in with the assumption that, okay, certainly Star Trek Adventures players are going to buy this because it's another product and they love Star Trek and they want to support us. That's great. And then there's some tools in here that'll be useful for them. But we really wanted this product to be aiming at the new fan, the new Star Trek fan, the new gaming fan, someone who may know a little bit about Star Trek or Star Trek Adventures, but maybe not a lot. And they need that primer. They need that like Star Trek 101. Especially the younger generations, right? Because they're not old like us. they don't know the 50 years of history of Star Trek behind us. They probably know the high notes, right? They know what a Klingon is and a Romulan and a Tribble and the Enterprise, et cetera, et cetera. But because there's just so much so much Star Trek and so much lore built around it that we wanted to try to distill it down into just like, in this case, 10 points about Star Trek. What is Star Trek? Like what is the important things? And this is all, of course, our opinion, right? We don't have an oracle that we know from on high what Star Trek is or is not, because even Paramount doesn't know, because it changes by series and producers by producers and writers by writers. Like everybody has an overall sense of what Star Trek probably is. So for the purposes of the game, we wanted to put 10 points in here to say, here's what we think Star Trek is for the purposes of, Captain's Log or Star Trek Adventures. And so hopefully, new fans will read this and go, oh, okay, I get it. I get what Star Trek is. I get what Star Trek is shooting for. And I get how Star Trek is different from Battlestar Galactica, different from Star Wars, different from Firefly, different from, every other science fiction property out there. And then we follow that up by 10 points about what is Captain's Log, like what is this game, what is the point of this game? Now that you know what Star Trek is, what is the point of this game? How does this game build on that, or how does this game fulfill that quote unquote promise that Star Trek delivers? And so hopefully between those two, I think it's like 10 pages total, if that, and plus there's a lot of art in there, so hopefully between those two short sections, a fan will look at this and go, oh, okay, I get what Star Trek is. And now I'm curious. Now I want to learn more, and then maybe now I want to play the game and get into it and start, making some stories. So that's why it's in here. It really is because we are targeting, new gamers, new Star Trek fans, and trying to make this book be kind of a on ramp into both tabletop gaming, and also an on ramp into Star Trek, into what is Star Trek, because it's such a beautiful, amazing franchise. And we as the development team want to share that with people, and the way we're doing it, of course, is by making role-playing games, whether it's a solo RPG or a tabletop, a group tabletop RPG. And so we want to just kind of like, set that baseline so that we can build from, we can build from there and they can build from there. So I mean, hopefully it works. I mean, the feedback we've gotten on this type of chapter has usually been pretty positive. Surprisingly, even from like veteran Star Trek fans who already know this stuff backwards and forwards, but they still appreciate the refresher or the reminder. Yeah. And even then, like I've heard people say that they'll read these 10 points or whatever, and it might spark an idea, right? And that is the most important thing I'm trying to do with these toolkits is get it in front of your face, get you thinking about it, and then if it starts firing off ideas and starts making you feel creative, then I've done my job, and I'm super excited, because then I want to read your stories, I want to hear about your characters, all that stuff.
That's great stuff. I love the way that you break down the technologies, like the important technologies and errors of play, which is really useful, because you're writing this game for all the errors of play, which I always thought, I thought you did a really good job of working that in. I mean, I know previous Star Trek games have kind of divided up the different errors into different books and everything.
Yeah.
And, I appreciate the way that you managed to combine all those, and they still feel different. I don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in chapter 2, chapter 2 is the primer on the Star Trek universe, and this is where we, like you were saying, we tried to very, very briefly explain the key points of the setting. Right. Here's why money is not that important to the Federation. Here's how the culture kind of works. And then, a primer on all the key technological points that you see on the show. What's a cloaking device? What's a warp drive? What's a transporter? What's a tricorder? What's a communicator? Just the stuff that's like so commonplace to us, because like we've been fans forever, but it might be, completely opaque and impenetrable to somebody new coming into the franchise who may not know the difference between a communicator and a tricorder. And then you just, try to gently help them along and explain it. And, so yeah, I think we tried to make it brief, because like we didn't have the space to write a technical manual, and there are some very good Star Trek technical manuals out there that there was no point trying to compete with those, because they're so good, and we're using those as reference materials too. So we just wanted to just give writers and gamers just enough to understand the stuff, so that when they start getting into the storytelling part of it, they can feel a little bit more confident. Oh, I'm talking about the warp drive here. Oh, I know what a warp drive is. Or if I don't remember, I can go look at page 35 or whatever, because there's the short description of a warp drive. And you know, one of the things that I really appreciate about Star Trek is that it's a 7-year-old franchise at this point, and somehow, like, through all the different regime changes of producers and managerial teams and writers and so on and so forth, like, somehow they've been able to keep most of the franchise consistent, right, from Enterprise era all the way out to the 32nd century Discovery. Like, there's a lot of consistency woven into there, which is good, because that means when we're writing a general, like, 101 primer, then we can explain what a communicator is, and a communicator, pretty much the same device across that 1,000-year span of time within the setting. And that just makes it easier to explain things, because then that way you don't have to explain it over and over again. And they don't call it one thing in one era and some completely different random name in a different era, right? It's consistent and it works. So that just helps us teach the setting quite a bit. We throw in some technobabble pieces. We talk about Starfleet as an organization, and some of the standard operations, some of the things you would expect your character to know, like what's a red alert, how's that different from a yellow alert, how is that different from a blue alert when you're in space dock or something. How does Starfleet generally handle emergency situations? And we try to keep this not to say basic, but really at a high level. And of course, if fans are curious, they can hit their favorite search engine, and they can find reams of information online about how Starfleet works, about how the Judge Advocate General works, so on and so forth. Because there's so much lore out there. There's so many fans creating, fan canon and throwing it out there. So there's a wealth of material on the interwebs for Star Trek, and we were just trying to distill as much of it down as we could into as few pages as possible to make it easy. And then to your point about the eras of play. That was a fun challenge when we started doing this for the Player's Guide and the Game Master Guide, because it was like, okay, how do you take that 1,000 years of in-game setting and timeline and condense it down into sizable, meaningful chunks, so that a player or a group can come in and say, well, we're going to play Star Trek. I was like, well, hold on. What kind of Star Trek are we? Are we doing like Enterprise era Star Trek? Are we doing original series? Like there's a lot of, now that there's 11 series or 10 series, 11 series now, and 10 movies or whatever. I mean, there's just a huge amount of possibility. And like, even within a tight timeline, like the Next Generation feels very different than from Deep Space Nine. And both Next Gen and DS9 feel different from Voyager, right? Just partly because of the locations, but also just kind of the tone and the attitude. So like, even within a short time frame within the setting, you could have wildly different stories. I mean, actually, Discovery season 1 and season 2 and Strange New Worlds is a good example, right? Because like season 1 of Discovery is all about the Klingon War, and then season 2, like, they're kind of recovering from the war, but they're getting into that weird interesting mystery about the 7 signals. And then Strange New Worlds kind of picks up after that. It's kind of post-war. They reference the war a couple times in the series, to where you can see that some of the characters have significant trauma related to that war, and that's different tone than when you get into the original series and you got Kirk and Spock and the Technicolor Enterprise and the Play-Doh looking food, and it's just a very different experience, right? So like, if you were to sit down with your group of players and say, hey, let's play Star Trek, that's when you need to have a really good session 0, and maybe a book like this by your side to say, okay, what era do we want to play in, what kind of ship do we want, so on and so forth. So we really try to distill the timeline down into like 5 or 6 big chunks that are tonally consistent internally, and then try to explain them in a couple pages, so that it sparks ideas in people and gets them thinking about what's possible in this era of play compared to this era of play. And so hopefully folks will find it useful. I mean, fortunately, we do have all those series that we can at least refer to and say, this era of play is related to Lower Decks and Picard. So if you've watched those series, you kind of have a feel for the tone we're going for this era of play. This other era of play, the early Federation, that's Enterprise. If you're familiar with Enterprise, you kind of got a sense for the tone that we're going for. So hopefully, fans appreciate this this little guidance, and then go do amazing things with it.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, then let's see. Moving along, we have chapter 3, reporting for duty.
This is so chapter 3 is like if you are a hardcore Star Trek fan and you already know everything there is to know about Star Trek. You know the eras, you know what Star Trek is, you know what Star Trek isn't. You're like, you know what, I'm just gonna go skip straight to character generation. It's chapter 3, that's the way to do it. And in fact, in the introduction, where we provide a sidebar of recommended episodes to watch that are character focused, like very, very character focused, just to give you some ideas. But in the introduction, we say, hey, look, here's how this book is set up, right? Chapter 1's about Star Trek, all about Star Trek. Chapter 2 is all about the essential elements of the franchise. But look, if you already know all that stuff, just skip to chapter 3 and start creating your character, right? So we try to put some guidance in the book right away to say, look, you might already know this stuff, so just skip it. But if you're new to it, then take the time to read it. But yeah, so chapter 3 is all about creating a character, and we provide a lot of options. Basically, what we did is we took the life path creation system from the core rule book, along with the adaptations and revisions that we did in the Klingon core book for Klingons. And we also took the optional character generation options that we provided in the player's guide. And we took all those different life path options and put them together into this chapter, did a top-down edit and refresh and cleanup of it, so that a player coming into Captain's Log doesn't have to be limited to playing a Starfleet character or a Federation character or a Klingon character. They can play literally anything they want to play within the franchise or the setting. And I think part of that was spurred because now that we have a series like DS9 and Voyager and Prodigy and Picard, where you're seeing main characters in the shows who aren't Starfleet members and may never be Starfleet members. They may be allies, they may be adversaries, they may be kids who've just stumbled upon a starship, right? Or in the case of Kira, Quark, Odo, Neelix, Kes, these are civilians or independent traders or something, independent space people, and they're somehow brought into the crew. They're brought into the show as main characters. And so we looked at that whole gamut of main characters across all the franchise, and we're like, we want to make sure every one of these is represented in this book, so that if there's a fan out there who just loves Kes or just loves Seven of Nine or loves a Dow from Prodigy, and they say, can I play that kind of character in this game, even though I'm not a member of Starfleet, I'm not a member of the Federation, I'm just some random person caught up in the Star Trek setting, and I want to go do some adventures with it. Can I do that? And I wanted to make sure that the answer to that was yes, so that you can play literally anything. And that's why, in our life path, we provide, I think, like 58 or 59 different alien species, all from the Star Trek setting in here, with the description and the attribute bonuses to say, look, if you've seen something on screen, it's either going to be in the book, or we also provide a little bit of guidance to say, if there's a species in here that you want to play, or if there's a species that you want to play in the Star Trek setting, but you don't see it in the book, here's a simple guidance on how to make it, right? Because we streamlined the rule set, we took out talents completely, right? If you're familiar with Star Trek Adventures, every character has a certain number of talents that are mechanical benefits to the character. And a lot of times at least one of those talents is related to their species, right? So each species has particular abilities that other species can't do, or maybe do differently. And in order to focus more on the narrative, we decided to remove talents completely and just leave that to the narrative devices of the player who wanted to play the game. And so by removing that text, right, that gave us more room to put more species in. So I think that there's so much flexibility here. And I think, if a creative fan wanted to bring in an alien species from a different franchise entirely, they could do it with a minimum amount of effort, because all you need is the plus bonuses to what, pick 3 attributes. Each of those attributes gets +1. So like if you wanted to bring like a Wookiee into Star Trek, just think about they probably have, +1 or +2 to fitness, and then +1 to, I don't know, daring, or maybe bearing, or something else, I don't know. Presence maybe. But because the rule set is so flexible already, I mean, even before we adapted it for Captain's Log, the system that Nathan Dowdell built is super flexible, and I think it would take very little effort for people to either bring in another alien species, or to just create their own. because there's a very light lift to having to create an alien species. You need a paragraph of descriptive text, which is just off your dome, whatever you can come up with creatively, and then there's attribute modifiers, and you're off and running with a new alien species. So the life path, again, if you're familiar with Star Trek Adventures, the life path is going to be very similar to what you've seen in the core rule book. We adjusted some of the descriptions a little bit just to make it flow more consistently with the other stuff that we were adding in from the Klingon book and from the player's guide. But I think we've given you so many more options now in this book that hopefully someone will come into this and go, oh gosh, I could play literally anything. And even though the game is called Captain's Log, you do not have to play the captain. You don't have to play a captain at all. We just figured that was like the initial conceit, because Captain's Log is a concept. It's such a great title for a game. It's like, hey, it's a journaling game. Oh, and they do Captain's Log all the time on the show. So why not call it Captain's Log? But you could play a chief medical officer. You could play an ensign and do a lower decks kind of game. You could play a Klingon warrior on a ship trying to make their way in the world. You could do a civilian doctor, like maybe Dr. Girardi. You could do something like that. I mean, literally, seriously, I think any character that you've seen on screen in a Star Trek episode, whether it was a main character or one of the supernumerary, some of the central casting background characters who they found a uniform that fit, right, and they're just standing at the console in the background trying not to look obvious, right? You could tell their story if you wanted to. And I just can't wait to see what fans do with it. But
great. I hold on.
Yeah.
I made myself a character.
Okay.
I pulled up some dice and I rolled the character, and this was all random. So I ended up in the original series, and I ended up with a Efrosian, and I had to go to I had to go online to Alpha, the Alpha site there. What's it called?
Memory Alpha.
I had to go to Memory Alpha to figure out what one was. They're the tall heads, the dark skin, and kind of the white Fu Manchu mustache.
Yeah, the big long hair and
who first showed up in one of the original series movies, I think.
Yep. There was one in Star Trek 3 on the I think it was the Saratoga that got. No, it was a Star Trek 3. No, it was Star Trek 4, I think. The one with the whales, where the ship, the whale probe went by the ship, and the ship started drifting into space, and the captain called for emergency. And then the president of the Federation in Star Trek 6 was also was an Efrosian as well. Great choice. And you know what? This is a non sequitur, Matt, but Efrosians are one of those species that I find really fascinating and really excites me, because it's a species that you've seen a couple times on the show, or in the series, and there's no information about it. And I always tell fans, that's the kind of species that you want to grab and start doing some world building on, and then make it your own, and then bring it into the game. So if you wanted to, they've developed Vulcans really well, and they've Klingons, of course, Romulans, of course. But I'm still waiting for someone to take the Tellarites and really do a lot with the Tellarites. I think Prodigy did a good start by getting Jenkin Pog a lot of Tellarite kind of lore and information in there. But the Efrosians are one of those species I want to learn more about them, and I want to see them on a modern Trek show, just with the cool look and feel to them. But that's for for gamers in an RPG, that's just awesome potential material to say, look, you see these cool species in the background, grab one of those, do some world building with it, and then just go have fun with it. So we'll see what happens. But no, I'm excited to hear that you created the character.
Yeah, it was great. Cool. It was great. I did it I did it all randomly. I just rolled on all the charts for everything. Yep. Even used the probability matrices. And I ended up with he's a lieutenant, and he's in security. Now that was interesting, because there's a little blurb about the Efrosians, and I can't remember exactly what it said, but it certainly didn't sound like security. Okay, so that's what I love about rolling the random stuff, is when you get two results that don't mix, and so you have to make them work together. So why is this guy in security? Why is he different from the rest of his people? So cool.
Yeah, very cool.
And so let's see, our next chapter, your home among the stars, which is creating a starship or a home base.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the same thing here. He's on a medical frigate. It was the Hiawatha class.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So
Very cool.
I named it the Nightingale, of course.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's so great. I can't wait to start reading some of your stories. Are you going to post them online somewhere?
I don't know. I'll be fair. I'll be honest. I didn't have enough time to do a mission. I did kind of like an away mission, just like one or two scenes, but I didn't roll up the whole mission.
Okay, that's super cool. I'm excited. I can't wait to hear more. I'll have to bug you on email and say, hey, how's your story going? How's your story going? And I think that, in a funny way, again, this is another non sequitur, but developing this book, it was almost self-serving in a way, because I'm such a huge reader. Like, I try to read as much as I possibly can every day when I'm not working, or I'm always trying to ingest story in some form or another. And I really love Star Trek stories. I really love reading Star Trek short stories, novels, comic books, etc. And while we were wrapping up the development of this, one night I was like, oh, wait a minute, we're providing a tool set for people to write their own stories. And then if they share them online, I'm going to get to read them all. This is really cool. I'm like, it's going to feed myself. And so I mean, even right now, because I'm in the middle of doing a actual play series on my YouTube channel and working. I built a character, I built a ship. I started doing the first mission, and now what I'm doing is I'm researching, trying to figure out where online can I start posting these stories that isn't my website, isn't my blog. Maybe it's like a Wattpad or something else, so, whatever the equivalent is these days, so that I could just start sharing these stories and just have people enjoy them. And then where can I go to find their stories so that I can read them and enjoy them and find out what they're doing with Captain's Log? So that's my little pet project right now, is like, what's the best, or not best, what's the most effective platform for what I want to do with this content. So that's something I'm working on. But I'm encouraged that a lot of people I've been seeing over the last week or so, like you, have created characters, have created ships, and now they're starting to tell stories. And I'm like, oh yeah, now I get to read all these. And then the downside of that, though, Matt, is I've still got all the work to do, right? I'm still working on the next projects and the next books and everything. And it's like, okay, now my free time has gotten even smaller. It's like whatever little time I had, now I want to be reading all these stories, and I just don't have enough time to develop the line and read. And so I'm gonna have to work on my balance again and figure out what do I have to let go of in order to focus on that. Anyway, so that was a non sequitur. Thanks for
that's great. That's great. It's really exciting.
So chapter 3 wraps up with I did want to say one thing about chapter 3 that we didn't get to. In addition to the life path, or as an alternative to the life path, which takes about I don't know what your experience was like, Matt, but it took me about 45 minutes to go through the full life path to make my character, which is fine. It's going through the creative process of creating it. But we wanted to provide another option that got people into the game a little faster if they wanted to, and that's called creation and play, where you create your character, but really you're just doing the bare bones. You're getting their name, their rank, their ship, maybe their attributes, maybe one focus or two focuses, just really basic high level stuff. You're not going into a huge amount of detail. And then when you start the story, then you start discovering the character as you tell the story. And the more I thought about, we wanted it in there because it was in Star Trek Adventures, and we thought it would be a good way to start the game faster. But the more I started developing the book and we started getting into the final edits and heading into layout and stuff, I was like, this creation and play method really echoes how characters are made in a Star Trek series, right? Because like, if you think about a Star Trek series, the writers and the producers and the creators of the series sit down, and for however many months it takes, they write a series Bible, and each main character has maybe a couple paragraphs of who that character is, kind of what makes them tick, what's important to them. They're kind of talks about their values and stuff. And then they don't really know anything else, because they're not going to start building meat on that character until they start writing the episodes and until they cast the character, because of course the actor is going to bring a whole lot to the role as well. And of course as the series matures, that actor is almost certainly going to have input into the character, and we'll be talking to the writers and to the producers and saying, I don't think my character would do this, I think they would do this, and here's my vision for the character. And they'd have that back and forth with the writers, and then the writers start grokking onto that, and they're like, oh, this is what that actors would want to do with this character. Here's where they should go next. And so you start evolving the character as you write this series. And I thought creation and play would be a great way to emulate that, where maybe you as a player, maybe you don't really know where your character is going to go next, or maybe you don't know their whole backstory, but you can discover it as you're telling as you're going through the stories. You can start discovering it. And I think that's really powerful as a creative effort, because like as a writer, when I'm writing, short stories or novels or something, I have to do a ton. I mean, I don't have to, but my choice is to do a ton of planning ahead of time so that I really understand the character, I really understand the setting, and then I can go outline and then I can go write the story. But this is a different approach, which is kind of fun because it's like, there's no handrails, right? It's just like you're out into the void. You're on the blank hex map paper and you're drawing it as you go, as you discover. It's all, the fog of war is being lifted as you go discover. So I like the next time, like for my current actual play, I created the full life path, but I think next time I play it, like maybe I'll do a different series of missions or something. I think I'm going to use creation and play and just let the dice fall and just see what happens and see what kind of character I end up with.
Well, that's actually what I did. I did a creation and play.
Okay.
And I decided to take a kind of a really hands-off approach. This guy, we'll just see what happens. Let the dice fall. He doesn't have any script immunity. If he dies in a tunnel crash, then the story is about somebody else now.
Okay, interesting. No, that's cool. I can't wait to read about it. But
you don't know what's gonna happen to him, and that's the fun part.
Yeah. But anyway, so knowing that when you look at any of the Star Trek series, the characters are obviously the most important thing, because those are the characters that you're inviting into your house every week to tell you a story, and you want to be comfortable with them and you want to be engaged by them. But every bit as important as the characters are, the setting where those characters live is the next very most important thing. So is it a ship? Is it a station? What is it, a planetary system, or is it a planetary station? Like, where do they live? Where do they work? And how do they get from one adventure to the other? Are they going out to the adventure, like they're on a ship and they're going out to the adventure every week? Or are they living on a station and the adventures are coming to them every week, like on DS9? Right. So we wanted to make sure that we had a chapter completely devoted to building out your ship. Now, in contrast to Star Trek Adventures, because we did streamline the game system, ships in this game are really, by and large, narrative tools, more so than in Star Trek Adventures, right? We took out all the starship talents, at least the mechanical components. We've streamlined, starship combat and personal combat, and we also removed the fact that in Star Trek Adventures, non-player characters and starships can assist you mechanically on your task rolls, right? So we took all that out just to streamline the rule set, and we decided, let's just leave all that stuff to the narrative that the players are telling, to where if you're telling a narrative and you feel like the ship should be helping you with something, then either use your momentum to create, to make that an advantage, or just build it into the narrative and say, oh, my captain is using the ship sensors to detect XYZ, use some of the probability matrices and just build that into the story. You don't need a mechanical component that might slow you down to have to roll another dice or flip through the book to find the rule or something. You just make it up. Right. And that's what a storyteller is doing. They're just making it up. They just decide, they're making a choice, or you're letting the probability matrix make that choice for you. And sometimes you're surprised because, like, maybe you're expecting yes, and it's actually no. And it's like, oh, okay, well, no, then I'll just adjust the narrative. Right. But anyway, so knowing that the ship was really, really super important, or the station was really super important, we wanted to make sure that there was a chapter here that talked about that, about why it's important to have, the ship as a character, basically. And it's a really simple process. There's a flow chart in here about how to build your ship. Basically, it's just rolling on the era table or selecting an era if you don't already know, having gone through character generation, and then rolling on the series tables for which ship you got, or which ship you're going to go with, or you just pick one, right? So so we were able to pack in, like, I don't know, 45 or 50 space frames in here. Different ships from all the different eras, all the way out to Discovery 32nd century. We have a few options in there, and there's a paragraph of text explaining what it is. and then the statistics, just in the event that your ship might have to roll a task for something. We provided the statistics in there, but that's it, right? We were able to pack, I think, like three ships on a page, boom, 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 stat block, stat block, stat block. And if you compare that to Utopia Planitia, the book we did last year, that has all the spaceships in it for Star Trek Adventures, that we made sure to give room for like 2-page spreads for each class of ship, right, with like big art and big stat blocks and stuff. And so this is a very marked contrast to that, because we just didn't need all that level of detail for the purposes of Captain's Log. But I still think there's enough material in this chapter that if you want to play, any of the hero ships that you've seen on screen, at least the ones that we had the license to, right? We still don't have the license to Strange New Worlds or Prodigy, right? So we couldn't include the brand new version of the Enterprise, and we couldn't include the Protostar. But because the stat blocks in this book are really straightforward, I don't think it would be very difficult to build those ships if you wanted to. Just kind of compare them to something that already exists, tweak the numbers, and you're off and running. Or just make up the numbers yourself, right? I mean, ultimately, no one's going to stop you from maxing out your stats if that's what you want to do. If that's the kind of game you want to do. Okay, yeah, go for it. But again, just like creating a new species and adding it to the game and using it, I think creating a new starship, just given the guidance that's in the book, should be very easy. And I think especially for players who want to play a Klingon game or a Romulan game or a Cardassian game or something, even though we didn't have the space to put all those space frames in here as well, like we did focus the spaceships part of it, at least on the Federation ships. But I mean, ultimately the stat blocks are just numbers, right? So like if you want to play a Klingon game and let's say you're going to play a Klingon game in the Enterprise era, there's no reason you couldn't just take the statistics of the NX class and just use those statistics and say, well, this is a Klingon warbird from this period of time. Same relative power level, right? And then you're off and running. If you wanted to have a Dideridex warbird from the Romulans, right? Maybe take the Galaxy class and maybe add a couple points, because canonically the Dideridex was supposed to be much bigger than the Galaxy, but the way they filmed it, it was always kind of like equivalent, right? But if you want to beef up the stats a little bit, go for it. It's not going to break the game at all, because the game is so flexible already. So hopefully, folks latch onto that and just realize that the stat blocks are super, super flexible, and they can play literally, like any ship that you've seen on screen, you could make it in this game in a couple of minutes. And if you want to play a Borg Captain's Log game, I mean, that'd be kind of, I don't know, it'd be interesting to do it. But if you want to make a Borg tactical cube or Borg sphere or something, sure, you could do it in the system. That wouldn't be too hard at all. In fact, you could take any of the Star Trek Adventures products and supplements and just bring those stat blocks right in, right? I mean, all the work's done for you already. I don't want to necessarily encourage that, because we really tried to make this a standalone product, and I didn't want to make people think, oh, I've got to go buy the Delta Quadrant book, or I've got to go buy this other book in order to bring this other stuff in. We tried to say, look, this is a standalone. You don't need anything else. Really, you don't, because it's a nice to have, and it'll expand your storytelling possibilities, but it's not required.
Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job of making this really self-contained, and I love the streamlined rules, and I love the ship damage tables.
Right.
In the matrices, where you can just, oh no, my ship's hit. What happened to it? Oh, it's lost. The gravity's cut out or something. I thought that was pretty cool. I like, because the game has such a narrative feel, and because you're playing by yourself, so you don't have to argue with a table full of players. there is that. You can do these things that are a little more arbitrary. And you just roll on a chart to see what happened to the ship, whereas like a crunchier game, you would, what type of damage it was and how many points does the ship have, and you'd have a subsystem for all that. But yeah, I like the flow of this game.
Nice. Yeah, well, thank you, appreciate that. So then we wrap up chapter 4 talking about star bases and stations, because if you choose not to do a starship game like most of the Star Trek series, but you want to do a DS9 game or maybe a Shackleton Expanse game on Ranger Station, or maybe like a Vanguard game where the Vanguard series of novels is on a Vanguard station. You can certainly do that. I think there's tons of story potential being on a station instead of being on a ship, and we wanted to make sure that that opportunity was there as well, right?
Sure.
So we wrapped that up, and then we head out into chapter 5. Chapter 5 is really the meat of the rule system. Anyway, we talk about rules of play, how they work. We tried to pack in just as many examples as we could, because we knew this would be kind of a new lift for some people who have never played a solo RPG before, and also maybe who have never really tried to do guided creative writing before, because I think that's a thing nowadays. And I mean, it's been a thing, but it's like an evolutionary leap from those old choose your own adventure books that I remember from the 80s, right? Where you flip to page, you flip to number 1, you roll some dice. If one thing happens, you flip to page 80, or you something else happens, you flip to page 34, and then you just kind of like flip through the book from that way. So those kind of stories though were canned, right? Because like there's no way for you to creatively get out of those loops that were built into it. But with this game, you're writing it as you go, right? So like when you get to each decision point or probability matrix, and you get a yes no, or you get a task resolved, your story's branching into all kinds of places that you had no idea where it was going. And so this chapter 5 tells you, here's the rules, here's the streamlined rules that we provided, and here's tons of examples so that you can get what we're trying to go for here. Hopefully it's clear. And then just start playing. We provided some flowcharts. That's something that we haven't traditionally done in Star Trek Adventures, but I've been trying to build to that, to where because we've had 7 years of development experience with it, right? And we've learned that sometimes people learn visually, and sometimes it's easier to distill the important stuff into a flowchart than it is to hand them 10 pages of dense text and say, okay, here's the rules. and then you got to read it, and you got to try to understand it. It's like, okay, I think I got it, but then you got to get it to the table and start playing it. So we really tried to start bringing some flowcharts in, just to try to not simplify it so much, but just try to make it more clear about what we were trying to, what the intent was for the rules and stuff. So you'll see a lot of flowcharts in the book. And then we talk about what makes up a scene, how to use the mission tracker. We try to put some guide rails into the game so that you were doing a story that felt like a Star Trek episode, right? Where Star Trek episodes have 3 to 5 acts, like your traditional screenplay or teleplay. It is broken down into a series of acts and beats and scenes, and each scene is ideally meant to accomplish something, and then you go on to the next scene and the next scene and the next scene until you have a satisfying episode or story. And so we wanted to create like this little tracker where, as you attempt scenes, you decide whether that scene was successful or a failure, and you either check the box or you cross out the box, but then you're moving on to the next scene. Once that scene has concluded, either for positive or negative, then you're moving on to the next one, because something's going to happen next, right? You got to see, okay, I succeeded, what happens next? I failed, what happens next? And then we wanted to put some guide rails on that, because if you didn't have those guide rails, you could just tell one long story forever, right? And there's no real endpoint, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we really wanted to try to get that Star Trek feel of like, okay, here's a 50-minute contained episode that has 35 scenes and or 35 beats, or however many it is, just depending on it. So we wanted to give players that feel of like, okay, I've played 7 scenes, and there's been some clear progression. There's been some positives along the way. There's been some negatives along the way. And now this story starting to move towards some sort of climax or denouement or something. And then at some point it will end, and you'll get that satisfying feeling of like, oh, I've just finished this story. And then what happens? Like, did my character change? Did my character not change? What did my character learn or not learn from this episode? And then you can enjoy the moment of completion, and then you can go start the next one, building off of that. So we've got the mission tracker in here. We talk about that, give you some examples. We go into quite some detail about what are the probability matrices, how to use them, what to do with them. Always be asking the question why. I think every time something comes up in the game, ask why. Why is that happening? Why is that happening? And then go find a probability matrix that relates to that, and see what kind of results you get by rolling the dice. And we talk about, how we adapted momentum and threat for the game. We talk about the values and the directives and the focuses, all that stuff that Star Trek Adventures players will be familiar with, but new players and new gamers, hopefully they'll get a sense of that stuff as well. And let's see, what else did we do? We talked about how combat is streamlined, how Starship combat is streamlined. Again, we use flowcharts to kind of like walk people through the process, and to say, like, if you get to a point in your story where your ship kind of, maybe violence is the only option and you have to engage, or maybe you're fighting defensively, here's some guidance on how to play through that narratively, and then carry on with the story. Yeah, I think that covers this chapter. I mean, we do end the chapter with something that was important to us, even at the very beginning stages of developing the book, is that, intuitively we knew the Star Trek Adventures the game system well enough to know that if we were adapting it for a solo RPG, it was probably going to work where if you had a group of players but no game master, you could use the book as the game master. Basically, you could use the probability matrices to help guide the story. And as long as the group collectively is asking why is this happening, what's happening, who's that character, what's that character's motivations, there's probability matrices that will help you with that. And then you could be playing this collaboratively, but you don't need somebody to have the onus of being the game master and trying to create that narrative, right? You can use the book as the narrative guide. So we thought that was pretty cool. So we wanted to put some guidance in here for that. And then we took the next step and said, well, you know what? You could have a game master in the traditional sense, but that game master wouldn't necessarily have to do any prep work, because they could just lean into the book and into the probability matrices and say, you know what? I'm going to be the facilitator of this game. I'm going to help narrate. I'm going to be the voices of the non-player characters. I'll, and do the usual game mastery things. But so often, like me personally, I've done this plenty of times, and I've seen people talk about it all the time online, where they say, I'm a forever game master, and X game, like whatever game it is, X game just takes me hours and hours and hours to prep for a session, and I'm just tired. Like I'm burned out. I'm tired of prepping this game. And like, I remember back in the day when I was running Dungeons and Dragons, right? It would take me hours to make balanced encounters for my group. Who would inevitably find another solution and not even do the encounter. So it's like, you know what? I spent 3 hours on that stupid encounter, and you're not even going to fight. Come on. But anyway, so then we were thinking, well, like, you could still have a game master for the game, but they don't have to do any significant prep work, because all the prep work is already done for them, because it's in the probability matrices. They can just sit back and say, okay, characters, here's your inciting incident. Here's what's happening to you at the top of the mission. What do you do? Right. And then just as the players make choices and use the probability matrices to help figure out those choices, the game master can just sit back and say, yes, and yes, and yes, and then this happens and this happens. Oh, could this happen? What's the probability of this happening? I'm going to go roll on the probability matrix. And then just like leaning into the book and the creativity of the collective, group at the table, you can have a satisfying game experience. And it's not like you need a game master to actually plan out everything and do it. So I'm really, anyway, that was the theory, Matt. I don't know if it's going to work in practice, but we did some play testing and we thought it worked, but you never really know how something's going to work until it gets out to the masses. And then all the players out there in the universe will start playing it. And then we'll start getting that feedback to say, oh yeah, this is working great, or this is not working great, or hey, my group decided to try this and we don't have a game master, nobody wanted to step up, but we used the book as the game master and we had this amazing experience. That's what I'm hoping to see, but we'll just have to see what it looks like when it happens.
Well, I think that's a lofty goal. I think that's great. It's a great thing. I mean, it looks like it's going to work, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the challenge with all these products, to be honest with you. I think it's true for a lot of I don't know if it's true for a lot of gamers, and it's certainly true for me. Is like sometimes I'm working on these books, and I'm like, is this going to hit? Like, is anyone going to care? Is anyone going to play this? I don't know. And then I feel, so some days I feel super positive about it, and then some days I'm just like, I don't know if this is going to hit. I don't know. Is it working? Is it making sense? And fortunately, I've got a team that we work with. We work with each other, and we shore each other up when we need that shoring up, and say, no, it's really good. It's really good. And then someone else will say, oh, I think this section is really dumb. I don't like it. And it's like, oh, but this is the coolest part of the book. Come on. So it's like, if you get all those different opinions in there,
Yeah.
And you finish it and you release it, and then you're open to a million opinions, right? So that everybody in the universe will try the game out or read the game, and they'll all have their opinions, and they'll all share them online. And we'll go, and sometimes we'll go, yep, they got it, and sometimes we'll go, oh, they don't get it, and then sometimes we'll go, darn it, that's a great idea. Why didn't we think of that? Right. In fact, I'm already catching myself doing that. I've got my my draft over here, and I've got post-it notes all over it, because as I'm doing my actual play and I'm reading other people's actual plays, I'm making notes in the book going, oh, why didn't we think of doing this, and why didn't we do this, and we should have made this table bigger, or I wish we had the room to do more, or hey, this worked really good, and I put a little circle next to it and say, hey, this worked out really well. But that's just true for any product. You just you do your best, and you hope that it resonates, and we'll see what happens there. But anyway, I'm going on and on about this chapter, so let's move on to chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Moving on to chapter 6. Yes, playing Captain's Log. Okay.
Yeah, so this is so chapter 5 was the rules. Like, here's how to play the game, and from a rules standpoint, because like every game needs rules, and even though they're streamlined and they're relatively narrative focused, you don't need it's a game. We wanted to have rules in it, so there's rules in it. But chapter 6 is not so much about the mechanical components of the rules. It's how to take the rules and the story, and like how to tell a really good story. We talk about tropes of stories. This is almost like storytelling 101, in a sense, where we're talking about hitting the beats and getting your character involved, preparing to play. We talk about the hero's journey, the classic William Campbell hero's journey, even though it doesn't necessarily apply to Star Trek in the same way that it does to maybe Star Wars. There's still great concepts in there that are absolutely relevant to characters in any kind of story. We talk about doing cold opens or teasers. We get into the captain's log, giving some advice around that. We talk about the 3-act structure. So this is kind of like a basic writing course that we dropped in here, all oriented towards Star Trek and knowing the Star Trek tropes, because if you watch any Star Trek, you get the flow of what they're trying to accomplish, and it's fairly consistent from series to series. The beats that they're hitting, and back in the day it was commercial breaks, but now on streaming you don't have commercial breaks quite the same way, although they do often on some of these shows. They do a fade to black where you could feel the commercial fit in there, but then they just go on to the next scene, which is kind of fun, because sometimes I want someone on YouTube to put an episode up and put in some random commercials in the middle in amongst Strange New Worlds, right? You get some dramatic scene, and then you get a commercial for paper towels or something, and then it goes back to the show. Anyway, so chapter 6, we just provide a lot of writing advice, and really trying to help people think about the creative flow, and the core game loop of you narrate to a task, you roll your dice, figure out what the outcome is, and then narrate what happened, and then go back to narrating to the next task, and you get into this cycle of going from scene to scene to scene, very similar to what you do in Star Trek Adventures, right? Star Trek Adventures is built around the scene economy, so you've got scenes and encounters, and you just stack those on top of each other until you've got a complete episode. You're doing the same thing in Captain's Log. You're just going about it a little bit differently. So we provide a ton of advice about that. Hopefully it's helpful to folks who are not that familiar with creative writing, or structured creative writing, like screenplays or stage plays, or even novels. We talk about storytelling devices as well, like different ways to do flashbacks, flash forwards, flash sideways, in media res, just different stuff like that, just to spark more ideas. Right, these are just more tools that we're throwing at people, is to say, maybe this tool works, maybe it doesn't, but here's just more tools for you to play with and think about. And that is the end of the actual rules and chapter parts of stuff. Because this is a solo RPG, if you're familiar with other solo RPGs, you'll know that they are really built by and large on oracles or random tables, or in our case we call them probability matrices. So we have 4 appendices in the back of the book, and this is what, approximately probably 60 to 70 pages worth of random tables that give you guidance as to why you should be using that random table, and then you start rolling, and it's all kinds of different topics, whether it's the yes or no probability matrix is the main one, but then you're getting into mission types, because every every episode is based on some sort of mission, like whether it's a first contact or a medical mission or a tactical mission, whatever. You want to roll that randomly, figure out the high level mission type, and then each mission type has a subtable that you roll on to get into more detail about what that mission is. And so just a ton of random tables that you can roll on for all kinds of different reasons. We couldn't possibly pack in enough tables to cover every possible contingency, and that's just the nature of we couldn't do a 600-page book as much as I kind of wanted to, because I wanted to pack everything into it. But we had to do the best we could to hit the absolute key elements, plus some extra surprises here and there. And we'll just rely on fans. Like if some fan says, hey, I want a longer values table, or I want a set of tables about this thing, maybe they can just go write them and provide them for free online, and then people can use those, and we can build a whole library of fan-made cool stuff that they can take advantage of and just drop right into the game. But yeah, so the 4 appendices at the end of the book, that is the meat and potatoes, really. That's where all the different tables are that will help you tell your story, help you build, pull together the building blocks of your story, and help you kind of structure that narrative. And then from there, you can just go wild with it. And these tables, again, if you don't want to play the solo RPG, but you want to use this tool with your Star Trek Adventures games as a game master, or even as a player, you can use these tables to help spark your creativity while you're playing. Or if there's a whole section in here about NPCs, right? Like, what's the NPC's motivation? What is their attitude toward the Federation? What is their goal? Like, if you created an NPC in the moment on your game, and you're like, oh, I don't know what this character wants, you can roll on that random table and and then you got an answer, and you're just off and running and see what happens. So all these tools could be easily used in your Star Trek Adventures game, as well as Captain's Log. So just if nothing else, leaning into the utility of the toolkit here.
Yeah, the matrices are just so much fun.
Yeah.
It's just, they're just a lot of fun. I roll up a mission, starting from the high level and the theme and all that, and it was pretty weird. We had the show the flag, and so we were helping out with a social program after a disaster, which is really interesting. So it wasn't a medical thing we were doing, it was a social program. So that really got me thinking. I was trying to figure out what that was. And then somehow the mission required ground combat. Which, like, how does that fit? I love it when these things don't line up. It's nice when they do line up, but when they don't line up is when you really have to start thinking.
Yeah.
Why does this mission require ground combat?
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's cool. And that's just the fun of a lot of random tables, is like you get all these random elements, and you're like, okay, well, now what do I do with it? Exactly. And it reminded me a little bit, Matt. Once upon a time, back in the dark ages of my development as a writer, I got this advice from a writer further ahead than me, and she said, one way to spark some creativity is to get a whole bunch of 3x5 cards, 3x5 note cards, and write a different topic or a different thing on each one, and then shuffle that deck and draw the first 3 and figure out a way to combine those 3 things and tell a story about that. Like write a short story about those 3 things. And we were in a workshop environment, right? So there's 10 writers, and we each had 20 cards. And we all wrote random stuff on there. And the first exercise was for us to use our own deck and shuffle them and figure it out. And then what she did is she took everybody's cards and mixed them all together. And then she handed everybody 20 completely random cards and said, now do the same exercise. And we got completely wild results, because we were like, oh, these people who were on that table were coming up with all kinds of different ideas, and these people had their own ideas. And then, so all of a sudden, instead of just 20 cards in front of me, I had access to 200, and it was just a really neat exercise. And that reminds me of the random tables a little bit, because you just don't know what you're going to get. And it's just a fun creative exercise to take all those completely disparate elements, like ground combat, space exploration, and a dying moon. Maybe those are your 3 topics. Like, what am I going to do with this? Okay, now I got to sit here and think about it. and maybe roll on some more random tables and add more detail and add more nuance to all these things. Like, is there a culture living on the moon? Yes or no? Don't know. And if there is, okay, what's that culture like? You got tables that you can go start building out that culture. Maybe it's a democracy, maybe it's an oligarchy, maybe it's a dictatorship or something. So there's just all kinds of possibilities, and it's just how much time do you want to put into it, and how creative do you want to get?
Yeah, well, no, it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun playing with it. It was great. And the individual tables were very in keeping with Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
I put them all together and I thought, wow, how do these things make sense? I don't know yet, but it's definitely a Star Wars story. Look, there's some sort of quantum beast, and there's subspace, and there's it's all the it's all the Star Trek tropes mixed up. Mm-hmm. It was great. It was a lot of fun. And so I think that's the best praise I can give to a game like this, is that it feels like Star Trek.
Yeah. Thank you. That's
rolling the roles and playing the game feels like watching an episode of Star Trek. So, well done. Job.
Thank you very much. I try really hard to make sure it's in there. My lead writer, Michael Dismuke, I think he did a great job. We brought in a great group of diverse writers and freelancers and editors and proofreaders and so on and so on and so on, to get all those diverse voices in here. And all of us, this is why I keep bringing them back and hiring them to work with it, because they are all super passionate about Star Trek, and they're all very knowledgeable about Star Trek. And we try to put that our love of the franchise into everything we do, so that when fans see it, they're like, oh yeah, this is Star Trek. They get it. I get it. And now I'm vibing off of it. And so for you to say, yeah, this feels like Star Trek, that's the highest compliment that you can give me, because that means we got it right, or we got it close enough to right, because there's no one true answer. I think even Trevor Roddenberry probably doesn't know, or no, not Trevor, Eugene probably doesn't have a one true definition of Star Trek. Although if anybody would, it probably
doesn't always feel like Star Trek. There's a whole bunch of different Star Treks.
Yeah.
It's a big umbrella. So yes, well done. It's really a fantastic book, and it's really a unique and interesting experience. And it looks really good too. We haven't mentioned the art, but you've got some great pieces of art there from across a lot of the franchise. I was surprised to see, I don't know why, but I was surprised to see some Prodigy pictures in there, playing it all together. So
yeah. Fortunately, we have a really great relationship with Paramount, and we told them, look, this is going to be a book about the entirety of the franchise. Even though we don't have the license, can we use this picture? And they said yes. And we were like, yay!
Yeah, no, that was really nice. That was good.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to secure the Lower Decks license in time while we were doing this, so we couldn't add much Lower Decks content into it. But of course, the Lower Decks book is coming out too, and you can just port that stuff right into Captain's Log if you want to. But we did the best we could with what we had. So hopefully folks enjoy it.
Yeah. And I love the different covers. I love the fact that you have different.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was again an experiment. We were really encouraged at the response to the multiple covers we did for Utopia Planitia last year, and we thought, well, why don't we see what happens with Captain's Log? Now we didn't want to overwhelm retailers or fans with like too many covers, and so originally I was thinking, oh, we should do a cover for every series, and then and smarter minds than me said, hold it, we can't do 13 covers of the same damn book. We're not going to do that. And so we talked about it, and we said, okay, how about we try 4 and just see how those 4 do. We'll do original series, Next Gen, DS9 / Voyager, because those are, even now they're still the most popular series because they've got so much history and longevity behind them. And then we'll do Discovery because that's the first of the new shows. And then we created for Stephanie Toro over at, she's a staffer on Modiphius. She designed the covers. She did a fabulous job. These covers are amazing, and really proud of the work that she put into them. And fans are responding to them. Like, fans are really digging the covers, and I think it's a testament to her work, to where, like, consistently the comment I'm seeing is, I love all the covers, I don't know which one to buy. Like, I'm actually, you know, people are like, I don't know what to do. Like, I want the book, but I don't know which. Like, you're making me make a choice, and I want them all. And I didn't. I mean, I guess in the back of my mind, I was thinking, yeah, this might be a hard choice to make. But my problem is,
have a random chart to roll on. Which
yes, no, we should have done that, right?
Put that on the website or something. Yeah.
Yeah, we should have a probability matrix for which book to buy.
When you're ordering it, you're like,
oh yeah, right. We should put that on the website, right there on the web store. If you can't decide, roll a d20.
Roll a d20. That's right. To get in the spirit of it right away.
Or you know what would be funny, Matt, is if there was some way to build into the website a random button. Right. If you just can't decide, just push the random button. You'll buy one, and we'll just ship a random one to you, and you'll be surprised when it gets there.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, really exciting. Open it up.
Yeah. Although I do want to, I don't think we mentioned it. I do want to emphasize to fans that even though there are 4 variant covers, the interiors of the books are identical, 100% identical. So don't feel like you need to buy the original series, and then if you want to play next gen, you got to buy the next gen. It's just the cover that's different. All the interior stuff is absolutely identical. These are just fun variant covers that we thought would be cool if you wanted to kind of represent your favorite series on the cover, but all the interior is the same. So hopefully people get that. Like, I know that we have it in the product description. We've talked about it on blogs. We've talked about it on shows like this, and I think some fans are still not connecting with that. And so the more we can emphasize, look, it's the same book, it's just different covers. Hopefully the message will get out, because the last thing I want is somebody to buy it and be disappointed or confused when they finally get it. I just want them to have fun and be excited by it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. This has been really great. It's a fantastic book. I can't wait to see what people do with it.
Yeah, me too. And thank you so much for having me on the show again. I'm always grateful for you and Manny every time that you let me come on and talk about Star Trek at length. And you're doing such great stuff for the industry. So I really appreciate everything you do. I listen to your shows all the time when I'm working. I've got it on in the background, just listening to all the cool stuff that you guys are talking about, and all the great guests that you have on too, because it gives me great insight into what's going on. Because I live in such a Star Trek bubble that I don't really see what's happening in the rest of the universe of the gaming world, right? So listening to your show helps me understand what's happening in the rest of the field. So I am grateful for all you guys. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, all right. Thank you for watching, everyone. And make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Cheers, everybody. Thanks, Matt.